Number 8. Henry Vincent. 37-year-old Englishman Henry Vincent had been linked to multiple burglaries already when on April 4th, 2018, he decided to strike again. He, along with an accomplice, broke into the home of an elderly pensioner in Hither Green, London, belonging to 78-year-old Richard Osborne Brooks and his 76-year-old wife, Maureen. Osborne Brooks told authorities that he heard a knock at the door late at night. When he answered the door, the two men grabbed him and shoved him into his home. They demanded money and Vincent used a screwdriver as a weapon to intimidate Osborne Brooks. But Osborne Brooks didn't back down. In an attempt to protect himself and his wife, he grabbed a 12-inch kitchen knife and told Vincent to leave, warning him that they would be sorry if they didn't. When Vincent's accomplice saw the large knife, he fled the scene and encouraged Vincent to do so as well. Instead of following his accomplice's lead, Vincent lunged towards Osborne Brooks with the intention of stabbing him first with the screwdriver, but Osborne Brooks's knife made contact first. Vincent finally fled the home following the stabbing, but collapsed nearby. Police found him and transported him to a nearby hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds and was pronounced dead. Osborne Brooks was arrested on suspicion of murder, but was released without charge shortly after. Today's featured fan shoutout is Instagram follower Sinister Sadie. To appear in our next video, send us your pic, rocking the latest merch from theywillkillyou.com, and send it in to us on Instagram today. Number 7. Christopher Hoops. The belief that someone is intruding your home, whether or not it's true, is sometimes enough for tragedy to strike. The case of 36-year-old Christopher Hoops and his 25-year-old wife, Colleen Hoops, is a tragic example of this. In the middle of the night on May the 20th, 2022, Christopher Hoops woke up in their Tempe, Arizona home and was startled by a figure in his bedroom. He reached for his gun and fired 3 shots, 2 of which struck the figure. Upon realizing that it was his wife, Colleen, Christopher called 911 for help. Officers arrived at the home at 3:45 a.m. and Colleen was rushed to the hospital in an effort to tend to 2 gunshot wounds in her chest. Unfortunately, she was pronounced dead just a short time later at 4:10 a.m. Christopher was charged with second-degree murder and the unlawful discharge of a weapon. He was taken to jail and booked on a $750,000 bond, which he posted on May the 22nd, 2022. His trial is expected to take place in October of 2022. If found guilty, he will be sentenced to a maximum of 25 years in prison. Number 6. Virginia Morrison. Virginia Morrison, a 69-year-old grandmother from Florida, was enjoying her Sunday afternoon at home on May the 22nd, 2022. That is, until she realized that an unidentified man had entered her home and was standing in her living room. She described the man's face as a total blank, and despite her asking him who he was and why he was in her home, he said nothing. She called to her husband in the other room, 80-year-old Charlie Morrison, to get his gun in hopes of scaring off the intruder. When the sight of the gun didn't make the intruder budge, they called 911. Morrison quickly grabbed her own gun while on the phone, and Charlie fired a warning shot into the ground beside the intruder. That made the intruder leave the living room and go outside, but he remained on their property, maintaining a blank stare and never saying a word. Virginia followed him outside and fired her own warning shot above the intruder, warning him that she would shoot him if he didn't leave. That's when the intruder started coming towards her, and in an act of self-defense, she shot him. Police arrived at the scene and took the man to the hospital, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. He was later identified as 38-year-old Ezequiel Rosario Torres. At this time, no charges have been filed against Morrison, but the case has been forwarded to the state attorney's office to decide whether or not she should face charges.
He stepped in, and I just turned around and I said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Nothing. This guy never said a word the whole time he was here. I fired a warning shot, told him to back off. He just kept coming. And I didn't realize I'd hit him, but once I looked, he had a hole right here in his t-shirt, and I thought, I got him.
Number 5. Anthony Gray. On April the 18th of 2022, 52-year-old Anthony Gray trespassed onto Stagg High School in Stockton, California. He drove his car into one of the school's parking lots, parked, and walked right onto campus. A high schooler named Alicia Renyaga was in the parking lot at the time, and when Gray saw her, he targeted her out of the blue, stabbing her several times. Witnesses and school security called 911, and when police arrived shortly after, Gray was immediately arrested. The high schooler was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, she was unable to recover from her wounds and died the same day. Police determined the stabbing to be a random act of violence and have been unable to identify a motive for Gray's actions. At a hearing on May the 16th, 2022, Gray suddenly called out to the judge saying that he wanted to plead guilty to the crime. His lawyer disagreed with his plea and expressed to the judge that Gray had a history of mental illness and should be interviewed by a doctor to determine if he is fit to stand trial. The judge granted this request, but on June the 13th, the court-appointed doctor concluded that Gray was in fact competent to stand trial. Gray was charged with murder, injuring a child, and possessing a weapon on school grounds, and is awaiting trial behind bars without bail. A date for the trial has yet to be set. Number 4. Travis and Jamie Lynn Jewton. At 3 a.m. on August the 13th, 2021, married couple Travis and Jamie Lynn Jewton were asleep in their home in Marion County, Oregon. They were set to travel to Hawaii the next day and had a friend who would be looking after their home and cat sleeping in their guest bedroom. An intruder, unidentifiable due to the mask they were wearing, broke into the home and attacked the married couple with a knife while they slept in their bed. 24-year-old Jamie Lynn suffered 19 stab wounds, and in trying to protect his wife, 26-year-old Travis suffered several stab wounds of his own. The friend sleeping in the next room woke up and called the police when they heard what was going on. Shortly after the attack, the intruder disappeared. When police arrived on the scene, they found that Travis had passed away in his heroic attempt to save Jamie Lynn from the attacker. Jamie Lynn was still alive and was rushed to the hospital to have her injuries treated, from which she eventually made a full recovery. Nearly a year later, police have been unable to identify the suspect or a motive for the attack. In June of 2022, Travis's family announced a $50,000 reward to anyone with information that will help them solve the case. Number 3. Louie Scaco. On November the 16th, 2020, 23-year-old Celeste Mano, a call center worker from Melbourne, Australia, was stabbed to death by 35-year-old Louie Scaco, a former colleague. The killing took place at 4:10 in the morning after Scaco had broken into her room through her window while she was asleep. It was revealed that Scaco had been stalking his victim for months leading up to the murder. Shortly after the fatal attack, Scaco turned himself into the police. In the immediate aftermath, police received a tip that Scaco, on his way to the police station, had dumped a cell phone near the home. It turned out to be Mano's cell phone. The police had a sneaking suspicion housed important information related to the killing. The cell phone was retrieved and was indeed found to have compelling evidence to aid in the prosecution of Scaco. Despite having turned himself in shortly after the killing, Scaco pleaded not guilty in court under the advice of his lawyer, who was attempting to help him avoid a jail sentence by obtaining a forensic psychiatric assessment stating that he was mentally ill. At a hearing in March of 2022, an official psychiatric assessment declared Scaco mentally unfit to currently stand trial and will likely remain unfit to do so for at least a year. An update on the case is not expected until the spring of 2023. Today's topic was inspired by Sarah Bryan and Eastern Border. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Justin William Wright. Just before 9 a.m. on the morning of June the 21st, 2022, a 26-year-old man by the name of Justin William Wright broke into his next-door neighbor's home in Clearwater, Florida. The neighbor, a woman whose identity has remained private for her protection, woke up to find Wright standing in her bedroom. He began to attack her, and as she fought to defend herself, she managed to call the police. Even the police being on the phone didn't faze Wright, and he continued to attack her That's when she reached for her gun and shot Wright once, which was enough to put an end to the assault. Police arrived and found Wright dead at the scene. Upon examination of the woman, she had injuries that aligned with the assault she reported, and police determined that the weapon she fired was legally registered to her. The investigation is ongoing, but police haven't found any information suggesting that the shooting was anything other than self-defense, nor have they been able to determine Wright's motive for breaking in. Number 1. Joe Horn. On November 14, 2007, Joe Horn, a 61-year-old resident of a wealthy Pasadena, Texas neighborhood, witnessed 2 unidentified men burglarizing his neighbor's home in broad daylight. Horn called 911 to report the incident, and while on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, Horn revealed that he owned a shotgun and asked if the dispatcher would like him to stop the intruders. Despite the dispatcher telling him not to and to stay inside his own home, Horn became increasingly agitated with the situation, saying that he couldn't let them get away with it. Eventually, Horn couldn't contain himself anymore, and he ran outside with his gun to confront the 2 intruders, who were fleeing with a bag full of money and jewelry, telling them not to move. When the intruders tried to run off anyway, Horn fatally shot them in the back. The case went to trial, during which a grand jury decided that Horn's actions were justified, and he was found not guilty. Thanks for watching. Would you rather try to break into Mike Tyson's home or into the home of an 80-year-old person who is armed to the teeth? Let us know in the comments section below.